you miss finding something, and then it comes up in the game, and then you win the game by whatever, and you realize, how significant. So all of us offensively, within the framework of our offense, are diving into the opponent, finding the right balance in week one of not having too much, but good answers. And there's a little serenity. There's some quiet to the evenings where you're watching tape and you see certain things. You're always looking for behavior patterns from the opponents, and so when you're able to find something and then you see it work in a game, that's pretty fulfilling. And it's hard to get that anywhere else.
Yes, that was Sean Payton talking about burning the proverbial midnight oil as he gets back into the element of the NFL that he missed most during his season away, and that is the game planning, the grinding on film until 2 a.m. to find that one little hole in the defense that you can exploit. That's where we're at. The off-season, training camp, preseason, whatever we call this time before real football starts, it's over. The Broncos are heading into their final weekend off for players, certainly not so for coaches, but for players, the final weekend off. And come Monday, it's full steam ahead to week one and the home opener against the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm Nick Kosmider. You're listening to Not Another Bucking Podcast. And we thought this would be a great time in this episode, since we are about to head into the season, to answer your questions. Again, we've loved the feedback that we've gotten about the episode, so we wanted to get you guys involved and answer any questions that you have about the Broncos. So we'll get right into it. I'll bring on producer Matt, who's going to shoot these questions that we got from all corners my way, and then we'll do the best to answer them as we can. So Matt, who is up first?
All right, so the first question we got is from Darren. He wants to know, what was the knock on Taylor Grimes? He was looking forward to seeing him after all the talk.
Yeah, and some of that talk was here on the pod after the first preseason game against the Cardinals. Grimes had a couple big catches on that should have been game-winning touchdown drive until the defense collapsed late. Shifty slot receiver, a small school guy out of Incarnate Wood. Not a lot of guys blazing an NFL pathway from Incarnate Wood. But he, again, I think ultimately that they were deep at wide receiver, deep in the slot position. But it was curious to me that he had that kind of performance in that game on that final drive, and really didn't seem to get an uptick in playing time. I think size worked against him. He just wasn't able to block in the run game, I think, the way that they needed to see from an NFL, caliber guy, and didn't bring him back to the practice squad either. So clearly the Broncos were ultimately looking for something else at that slot position. They also cut Kendall Hinton, which was a little bit of a surprise, a guy that is going into his fourth year. At last 2 years have been a good reserve role receiver for the Broncos offense. So, that they're still going to be kind of, I think, tinkering with this wide receiver position, which I think we'll get to here in just a little bit. But Darren, it's a great question. We really didn't see a whole lot of Taylor Grimes in practices or in preseason games after that first game against the Cardinals, and now he's looking for work elsewhere.
Yeah, and kind of following up with the receiver room, Benny is asking, do you think that Sean Payton skimped on wide receivers because he plans to utilize his running backs to supplement that position based on Javonte Williams lining up wide on his second play from coming back from injury? It seems like they'll be looking for ways to get multiple backs onto the field.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is fascinating. I wrote about this today at The Athletic. When that final 53, our initial 53-man roster came out on Tuesday, it included 3 healthy active wide receivers. Now, it had 4 altogether, but Jerry Jeudy is dealing with a hamstring injury. We talked about this in the last pod, though. He won't go on IR. It's certainly not the sure thing that he'll play, in the first week or even the second or third week. So that's an interesting one. They have 3 wide receivers right now available on this roster. Of course, with NFL rules now the way they are, and really this form that practice squad elevations took when the pandemic happened in 2020, you can bring players up to the active roster on game day without then having to expose them to waivers when you send them back down to the practice squad. It's just kind of a simple up and back. You can do that 3 times with a given player. After that, you would then have to sign them to the active roster in order to play. So the Broncos could go into this week with still just those 3 healthy active wide receivers, which is Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Brandon Johnson. and then pull up, say that they have four wide receivers on the practice squad, say Lil Jordan Humphrey or Philip Dorsett, the veteran who they just signed to the practice squad this week. It is fascinating. But to Benny's point, this is going to be a team that's not heavily relying on its fourth and fifth wide receivers. They want to be a team that is going to pound the football, to be sort of a dynamic running offense. But they also are going to feature running backs heavily in the passing game. We've talked about it on the pod before. A few coaches, few play callers involve his running backs in the passing game as much as Sean Payton does. Russell Wilson, I think you're starting to see that as his career progresses, using that outlet more frequently. So it's a great observation by Benny. You are going to see multiple backs on the backfield, or multiple backs on the field, and it's not going to be uncommon to see some of those guys lined up out wide. Again, it's a great observation. And Greg Dulcich, I think it could very well end up being this team's number two receiver, at least for the first half of the season, given the injury to Jerry Jeudy.
That kind of leads into the next question, which came from Elias, and I think you kind of touched on it there a little bit, talking about Greg Dulcich. But the question is, if Jerry Jeudy misses 2 or 3 weeks, who do you see being Denver's number 2 receiver behind Courtland Sutton?
Yeah, I do think it will be. I think if we're just talking about a yardage standpoint, I do think it's going to be Greg Dulcich. I think the Broncos, my feeling is that they have kind of purposely almost slow played his role in the preseason. I think they're going to do a lot of things with this guy that they've really tried intentionally not to give too much of a look at in training camp and in the preseason. He's going to be a guy who I think is going to be a really dynamic player for this offense up the seams. They're going to use him in a lot of different ways. And again, they have a veteran tight end room behind him. Guys like Adam Troutman, who I think might be in line for his best season, had a really strong training camp. So those guys are going to be involved. Right now, if let's just say that Jerry Jeudy misses the first 3 weeks of the season, I would think your 3 leading receivers during that stretch will be Courtland Sutton, Greg Dulcich, and then I'll go with Brandon Johnson, the second-year receiver, who is one of those 3 guys on the active roster. I thought put together a really nice training camp, had the huge catch against the Rams. He's a guy that I think can play multiple positions along the offense for Sean Payton, and is really a lot more comfortable here in year 2 in the league.
Yeah, I think that if I were a bet man, I think my money might be on Javonte Williams kind of picking up the slack there behind Greg Dulcich. And that's actually kind of leads us into Eric's next question, which is
the segue. Matt's got these segues rolling.
I am on it, man. So which weeks, looking at the schedule, assuming Javonte Williams is healthy, Eric wants to know which weeks you think are like prime Javonte Williams production weeks. I have the feeling this might be a fantasy football related question here.
We are fantasy friendly, and on this podcast for sure. So, no, it's a great question. And look, I don't think Javonte Williams right now is where he's going to be. Like, it's great that he has gotten cleared medically, that he has already played in a preseason game, that he recovered from that. He is going to be involved in week 1. But offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, suggested last week that, Javonte Williams is not going to get his full package of carries, of targets right away. It's just he's continuing to still, I think, fully get his body callous to contact and all those other sorts of things, that the mental aspect is still a part of this. So, you look at this game against the Raiders. I think that Samaje Perine might end up out carrying Javonte Williams in week 1. Then you have a really good Washington defense coming in week 2. I would target that week 4 game in Chicago on October 1st, where you really start to probably see Javonte Williams, assuming, to Eric's point, that he doesn't get nicked up in the meantime, where he starts to maybe really kind of get it rolling for them, which is great. And then that leads into the week 5 critical game against the Jets, where that could really be an early swing point in Denver's season. So I would say if I had Javonte Williams, I would kind of like manage my expectations with him as a fantasy guy for probably about the first 3 weeks of the season. After that, October 1st, that now you're right around a calendar year. You're right at a calendar year. He tore the knee on October 2nd of 22. Now you'd be at October 1st. That to me is kind of the point to look at and say, all right, he should be just about full go now.
Yeah, I do think that if you've got him in a PPR league, that adds a decent amount of value because we know that with how often we know Sean Payton wants to look for getting his running backs involved in the passing game.
Well, I mean, he had 4 targets in his,
Like
preseason,
5 snaps.
yeah,
Yeah. um, that kind of follows up into Jordan's question as well. He asked specifically about Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams, but I'm going to throw Samaje Perine in here as well and ask which of the Broncos running backs you think ends up with the highest number of receptions this year.
Yeah, it's a really good question. They are going to use all 3 of those guys in the passing games in various ways. I think their leading receiver will be Jaleel McLaughlin. I think they're that high on his capability out of the backfield. Now, he's not a supernatural receiver, but he is a guy that is just kind of a sponge in terms of soaking up the coaching. Whatever they're asking him to do, whatever coaching points that they're giving him, coaches have been impressed with how quickly he has adapted to things here, and his next level speed when he gets out in the open field is a reason that they want to get him the ball in those situations quite a bit this year. Now, you look at a guy like Pierre Thomas, who was an undrafted rookie in Sean Payton's offense in 2007, his second year in New Orleans. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he ended up being about a 400-yard receiver. And that, to me, would probably be the top end about what you're looking for the top running back receiver for this offense, because again, all 3 of these guys are going to catch passes. All 3 of these guys are going to be, dangerous in that way when this offense really gets going. But I'm going to go ahead and say that it's McLaughlin, all things equal, health wise and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. He's the kind of guy that you want to get him touches out in space. When he's out and has some room between him and the defenders, he looks like a dangerous guy when it comes to Sunday. So it'll be fun to watch. Wrapping up with the offense and kind of moving on, our good segue into the defense as well. Last season, after so much excitement around the Russell Wilson acquisition, there seemed to be somewhat of a division between the offense and defense. What are the attitudes like now? You think it's mostly positive or generally apprehensive? And that's coming from Nicole.
I wonder if Nicole could be referring to a warm day in Charlotte, North Carolina, when Russell Wilson comes to the sideline and tries to say something encouraging as the defense comes off the field after they've given up a score. And Mike Purcell, the veteran nose tackle, lets Russell Wilson hear it. More or less says, hey, like, you guys need to pick it up. That kind of thing, and some saltier language. And typically when these things spill out of players like that onto their teammates, they'll say all the right things after the game. Like, it's just this competitive, heated moment, but there's a foundation that underlies that where this is popping out and you're directing the tension in that way because it's something that is simmering there. And this was a defense last year that for most of the season was top 10 in most important measuring sticks. Right. And it was an offense that had a league low 16.9 points per game. And that was after they averaged almost 30 their last 2 games of the year. So this was a team that was barely putting up 2 touchdowns per game, simply not doing anywhere near enough for the defense that was more than holding up its end of the bargain. And part of Nicole's question is that came after all of this attention on Russell Wilson that players across the roster bought into as this is the guy that we've been waiting for, that it is kind of the missing piece of this puzzle. And they were okay with the attention that came on Russell Wilson when he got here last spring that was just way over the top because they just wanted to win. And so when all that happened and then the wins weren't coming, I think there was a natural tension between the two groups. Whether that has been solved now, we will not know until they actually get on the field. Again, it's the time of year where you say all the right things, and all indications are that there aren't hard feelings about what happened in 2022. Most of these guys have put it behind them because they know they have a Super Bowl winning head coach. They have a staff that completely knows what it's doing, has been here before. And so really that's now where this team on both sides of the ball is putting its trust, right? They're not depending on Russell Wilson this year. They know that they're not going to be led by his arm exclusively, right? Like that, they're not hinging their hopes on Russell Wilson, being sort of the MVP candidate that he was in 2020. So I think that aspect of it takes a little bit of that pressure off because he's not viewed through the same lens as he was just 12 months ago. And so I guess that is something you would call a silver lining from what happened. That being said, if he doesn't elevate his game, if he doesn't take to these changes that Sean Payton has made and really just be kind of that conduit for this offense, and rely on his veteran leadership, then you could have the same problems arise. The bottom line is this team is sick and tired of losing. They've done it since 2016. They have not made the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl 50 at the end of the 2015 season. They've had 6 losing seasons in a row. Like, they're just tired of losing, and they don't care how it comes, what it looks like. They just want to turn it around. And so absent that kind of turnaround, I think you'll continue to see some of the same tension, but winning cures a lot. And if they can get on a roll early, I think you'll see, a lot of happier faces in locker rooms.
Right. A lot fewer sideline fights when the teams making the playoffs than when they're.
They wouldn't even talk about
when they're eliminated. Right. All right. So continuing on, kind of talking about the defense a little bit more. Then Jeff had a question. JL Skinner, rookie safety, made the roster, made the initial 53. Presumably, he's going to be playing on special teams quite a bit. How much do you think his performance on special teams affects whether or not PJ Locke stays on IR or whether that timetable gets accelerated for bringing him back? They seem to kind of he notes they kind of seem to take up a similar role on the team.
Yeah, it's interesting. There were 5 safeties that made there were 6 safeties that made the initial 53-man roster, which is a lot. Right. Usually you have 4, maybe 5. But it was because that they knew PJ Locke was going to be going on IR with an ankle injury he's been dealing with for a couple weeks now. That became official on Thursday. So right now your 5 are Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, Caden Stearns, De'Laren Turner-Yell, the 2nd-round player who was a 5th-round pick last year, and then JL Skinner, the 6th-round pick out of Boise State. They like him a lot. He would have been a much higher draft pick had he not torn his pectoral muscle right before the combine, and he really started to come on late. So I think these things that I understand why they get viewed together, but so much of the time when you have a guy potentially coming back off IR, remember now PJ Locke cannot come back until week 5. So much depends on what is occurring at that time. If JL Skinner is playing good ball, he's going to stay on the roster. That doesn't mean they're going to leave PJ Locke on IR if they believe that he can help them. And it doesn't even mean that they'll cut another safety. A lot of times, some of these decisions in a way get made for you because other players are getting hurt. You have needs that you're needing to address in other spots. I think PJ Locke, as soon as they can get him back, they will, because he is a veteran of the special teams core 4 group. Like he's been that guy for the Broncos for the last several seasons. And before he got hurt, he was having a fantastic offseason, a great training camp. And he's a veteran leader that they signed back here for a reason. So I think in the Broncos' best case scenario, Skinner plays great, and PJ Locke is ready to come back for that Week 5 game against the Jets.
Yeah, having too many good defensive backs is a problem that any team would love to have, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so David's a little less optimistic about the team this year. If the Broncos start 0-4, he's wondering if they should go into full tank mode, presumably joining the Cardinals and the Buccaneers in the race to the bottom for Caleb Williams. What are your thoughts? Like, assuming the team starts 0-4, are they looking to tank?
Yeah, 0-4 would be an unmitigated disaster. There's no way around that, because that would mean you've lost each of your first 2 home games that are both very winnable on paper. The Raiders Week 1, the Commanders Week 2. It also means that you've lost to a Bears team in Chicago that had the league's worst record a year ago. So that would not be good. That would be an unmitigated disaster. It would be a stunner if that is where they are at after 4 games. Do they go into full tank mode? No, they wouldn't, because this is an ownership group that was embarrassed by what happened a season ago. By the fact not only that the team was 5-12, but that they were just this constant source of negative headlines, negative attention about the way that they were playing, the way that they were functioning. And I just think that if you have a Sean Payton coach team, if you're 0-4, it's a certain number of things have happened. You've either had some significant injuries that have hurt you in these early games. You've had just a series of close games where the bounces haven't gone your way. The offense hasn't gotten up to speed as quickly as they want. But they wouldn't go into tank mode for a couple reasons. They have too many veteran players that they have paid over the course of the next couple years. They are not trying to be you don't bottom out when you have that many guys that you're paying significantly, going forward. The other part of it is they just even at 0-4, I don't think would be bad enough. They would not be a bad enough football team, even with that record, to think that they're going to chase teams like the Cardinals and the Buccaneers to that bottom. And that's not why Sean Payton came back. It's not why they're paying him, something in the neighborhood of $20 million a year. They would look to Sean Payton and say, "Hey, fix this," and that's what the task would be. So no, there's very few circumstances in which I see the team. And, we can get into tanking being different in the NBA than it is in the NFL. Like, you have to plan to tank in the NFL a lot more. You don't do it by circumstance. The Cardinals are doing a fine job of it.
Yeah, can you imagine them asking Frank Clark to go out there and tank? Like that response, like that's just not gonna.
This team is full of guys who just aren't going to be interested in doing that. And at 0-4 in a 17-game season, you're not yet buried. Now, of course, if that's their record after 4 games, the odds are abysmal that they would turn it around, but it's not impossible. I do not think that that's going to be something that Broncos fans have to worry about, but I understand the question because there's been some disastrous stuff going on for this team for the last 7 years.
Yep. All right, we've got one final question from Alex. Who do you think is what do you think is the most improved unit from a year ago on this team?
That's a great question. To me, I think it's going to be the pass rush for this team improved over the second half of last year. So much of that has to do for now with the fact that Randy Gregory is healthy. Now, this is a guy that has to show that, and he knows that he has to show that over the course of a season. That has been, his bugaboo, if you will, that he has just not been able to stay on the field for more than 10, 12 games in a season. And 10, 12 games would be a marked improvement over the 6 that he played a year ago. But it's also the fact that you've got young guys like Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito who are still on their rookie contracts, who have shown just massive improvement in this training camp, look to be kind of real players there. And then you have a guy in Frank Clark who, although I don't think he's necessarily going to be a terror at the beginning of the season, and they will probably manage his snaps quite a bit the first half of the year, is a guy that's won 2 Super Bowls, has been there, knows how to make big plays. And they now have a guy like that on their team as well. So I just think that is a group combined with the talent and with the way that Vance Joseph, is going to scheme them up and use them in different fronts, bring other guys, in unique blitz packages. I just think they have more ways to get after the quarterback than they did a year ago. But the bottom line hope is that the answer is going to be better play at quarterback. I think we've seen encouraging things from Russell Wilson in training camp. I do. But there's just not enough of a sample size to really know until we get into that week 1 just how much he's healed from what was just a mentally and physically damaging year to him in 2022. That is the most fascinating aspect of a game that we have that's now only 9 days away.
I'm with you on the defensive front. I think there in the past there aren't really many defensive coordinators who blitz more than Vance Joseph. And then you also added a guy I've been singing the praises of, Zach Allen, all off season. That's a dude who can be disruptive both in the run game and the pass game. The number of passes that he bats down on a week-to-week basis is through the roof. Learned a lot from JJ Watt. I think that's going to do it for all our questions for the week, though, Nick.
All right. Well, we really appreciated the engagement. So excited to have you guys participating with us in this podcast. It's been awesome to hear. And we will be back next week with 2 episodes. We'll be back midweek to sort of really dig into and break down this game against the Raiders. And then we'll be with you right after the game to break down the very first matchup of the Sean Payton era after it's all over. Can't wait to get to that. Until next time, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.